They gave you a sanitized version of Jose Rizal, a safe version, a version approved by the same colonial powers that executed him. But what if the real Jose Rizal, the radical, the visionary, the man the establishment truly feared, was buried under a century of careful editing? Today, we dig up what they erased. The man behind the monument. Every Filipino school child knows the name Jose Protasio Rizal Mercado y Alonso Realonda, born June 19, 1861 in Calamba, Laguna. Executed December 30th, 1896 in Bagumbayan, what we now call Luneta Park. But here's what most textbooks gloss over. Rizal wasn't just a novelist or a doctor. He was a polymath who spoke 22 languages. He was a sculptor, a painter, a fencer, a naturalist. He corresponded with some of the greatest minds of 19th century Europe. And he was dangerous not because he carried a gun, but because he carried a pen. The Spanish colonial government didn't execute him because he started a revolution. They executed him because they knew that his ideas would outlive every revolution. The retraction scandal. Here is one of the most controversial mysteries in Philippine history, and one that has been quietly swept aside in mainstream education. On the morning of his execution, December 30th, 1896, Spanish authorities and the Catholic Church produced a document, a signed retraction. They claimed that Rizal, in his final hours, had renounced his opposition to the Church, recanted his writings, and re-embraced Catholicism. The document was used for decades as proof that even Rizal, in death, submitted to the Church's authority. But historians have been fighting over this for over a century. Critics point out that the signature on the retraction document does not match Rizal's known signature. The document appeared conveniently after his death. And Rizal himself, in his final poem, Mi Ultimo Adios, My Last Farewell, written secretly in his cell hours before dawn, makes absolutely no mention of any retraction or spiritual surrender. He writes instead of dying for a free Philippines, of giving his life willingly to the soil of his homeland. So which is the real Rizal? The man who signed the retraction, or the man who secretly wrote a poem of revolutionary love and hid it inside a small oil lamp? The debate rages on. But ask yourself who benefited from that retraction document? Noli me Tangere, the book they tried to destroy in 1887. A young Filipino doctor living in Berlin published a novel in Spanish. It was called Noli me Tangere, Latin for Touch Me Not. The Spanish colonial government immediately tried to have every copy burned. Why? Because Noli me Tangere did something no Filipino had ever dared to do publicly. It named the system. It showed in vivid, devastating detail how the friars abused their power, how the colonial government crushed the Filipino people, how the elite collaborated with oppression. The character of Padre Damaso was based on real priests. The suffering of Crisostomo Ibarra was a mirror held up to every Filipino ilustrado, the educated class, asking them, "What are you going to do?" The church declared the book heretical. Any Filipino caught owning a copy could be arrested. Rizal's own family in the Philippines faced retaliation. His mother was arrested and forced to walk 12 miles to jail an old woman, humiliated on a dirt road simply because she was his mother. And yet the book spread, hidden in hollow canes, sewn into clothing, passed hand to hand in the dark. They tried to erase it. Instead, they made it immortal. El Filibusterismo, The Darker Truth. 4 years later, in 1891, Rizal published the sequel El Filibusterismo, The Reign of Greed. If Noli was a wound, El Fili was a reckoning. The tone was darker, angrier. The protagonist, Simun, actually Ibarra in disguise, returns not to reform the system, but to destroy it. He arms revolutionaries. He plots a massive explosion to kill the colonial elite gathered at a party. The bomb doesn't go off. The revolution fails. But the book's message was chilling and clear. Reform has failed. The system cannot be fixed from within. And the violence you see coming, you created it. Rizal dedicated El Filibusterismo to 3 Filipino priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, who had been executed by the Spanish in 1872 on false charges of sedition, publicly garroted. Their crime? Being Filipino priests who dared to exist with dignity. What the textbooks often don't tell you is that young Jose Rizal, just 11 years old, witnessed the aftermath of their execution. It reportedly shaped everything that came after. Rizal and the propaganda movement. In Europe, Rizal wasn't alone. He was part of a movement. The propaganda movement, a group of Filipino intellectuals living abroad who were fighting not yet for independence, but for reform. They wanted the Philippines represented in the Spanish Cortes. They wanted equality before the law. They wanted the power of the friars curtailed. Rizal wrote for the newspaper La Solidaridad. He used pseudonyms. He wrote under pressure, in exile, often broke, often surveilled by Spanish agents, even in Europe. Here's what's rarely emphasized. Rizal was not initially fighting for independence. He believed, for a time, that the Philippines could be reformed within the Spanish system, that education and enlightenment could achieve what weapons could not. It was the Spanish response, the violence, the arrests, the execution of innocent people that radicalized those around him, even as Rizal himself maintained that the people were not yet ready for revolution. This nuance is almost always erased. People want either a revolutionary hero or a colonial collaborator. The truth is more complicated and more human. The execution, what really happened, December 30th, 1896. Bagumbayan Field, dawn. Rizal was 35 years old. He was led out to be shot, but here's a detail that most Filipinos have never been told. The Spanish authorities ordered that he be shot in the back, the traditional punishment for traitors. Rizal reportedly made a final request, that he be allowed to face the firing squad, to die facing forward, not as a traitor, but as a man. The request was denied. But in the moment before the shots were fired, witnesses report that Rizal twisted his body with his final strength so that when the bullets hit, he fell facing the sky. Whether legend or truth, the image endures, because it captures something essential about the man. Even in death, he refused to be made small. What they don't want you to know here is the uncomfortable question that historians and political thinkers have asked for decades. Why did the American colonial government, after defeating Spain, choose Jose Rizal as the national hero of the Philippines? Think about it. The Philippine Revolution was still being fought. Andres Bonifacio, the working-class revolutionary, the true father of the armed revolution, had already been executed, betrayed by his own side in 1897. Emilio Aguinaldo led the resistance against the Americans. The Americans needed a safe hero, a pacifist hero, a hero who had argued against armed revolution. In 1901, American colonial authorities passed Act No. 137, essentially enshrining Rizal's legacy as the national one, while systematically marginalizing Bonifacio, Mabini, and others who had taken up arms against America. They chose Rizal, and by doing so, they chose which version of Filipino resistance would be remembered. The pen, not the gun. Reform, not revolution. A martyr, not a warrior. Who benefits from that choice? The truth they buried Jose Rizal was not a myth. He was not a statue. He was a 35-year-old man who wrote 2 novels, practiced medicine in Borneo, fell in love multiple times, studied in Paris, argued with priests, and died on a grass field at dawn, facing the sky. He was flawed. He was brilliant. He was afraid, and he was brave. And the most radical thing you can do with his legacy is not to worship it, but to read it. To read Noli, to read El Fili, to read Mi Ultimo Adios in its original Spanish and feel what he felt on that last night. Because the version of Rizal they gave you was designed to keep you quiet. The real Rizal was designed to wake you up. If this video opened your eyes, share it with every Filipino who deserves to know the truth. Subscribe to They Erased, because history doesn't erase itself. Someone always does the erasing,